Several times now you've come to my home asking me about the red eyes, the legends, the myths, and every time I've shouted and asked and whisked you away because I didn't want to tell you. Well, I've had some time to think, and I figured that your persistence has earned you some information. Do you know anything about ghost ships? Those poor, unfortunate vessels that get lost for years and years and that reappear with a curse or evil or some such thing attached to them. It's an old Earth legend, you know. Well, I thought the exact same thing you're thinking. But I guess our legends have a tendency of following us out here, because we found something in space that wasn't natural. We found them in orbit around Earth's Trojan zones. This was 4 years ago when the new Vesta array had just gone up. Back then, I guess we were a little excited to stake claims, and when it detected what looked like a metal-rich asteroid, we flipped in our seats out of joy. It took us only 3 days to reach it, but when we got there, it wasn't an asteroid. It was a grouping of ships all docked together. The markings were all early Indian Federation, but when we ran them through the registry, we found nothing. And to find nothing for more than 30 ships seemed to us like someone was trying to cover something up. But that's beside the point. What you have to understand here is that we were not disappointed when we found those ships. If anything, we were incredibly happy. Salvage like that is worth 3 or 4 times its weight in gold, and just the ship engines alone were worth several years' worth of nitrogen for our crops. And the ships we would find in better condition, well, we could add them to Vesta's meager trade fleet, which was being outstripped in every way by Ceres's larger fleet. All we had to do was board the ships, pull out every single black box, and the salvage would officially be ours. We radioed in our find and moved along the hulls to look for major damage, and aside from a few micro-impacts, we found nothing out of the ordinary. This is where we were struck with another piece of good luck. Our ship was an old converted orbital tugboat, a callback from when 14 different countries were launching habitats into space with different parts. What that meant is that we had a universal docking clamp to help us along our way. We docked up, the vents sealed, and we sent a solar ping into the first dead ship. Everything looked good. We cycled the first hull through the atmospheric processors, then the second, then all of them. We checked the atmosphere, put on our suits, and opened the door. What we found was, well, less than savory. The sonar ping had showed us nothing, but when we floated in, we found the inside of the hull to be completely coated in a thick brown crust of dust, and an eerie frost clung to the luggage that floated in the zero-G. On top of that, wiring had been pulled from the walls, and the cockpit was completely stripped of parts, which meant no black box. Finding that, we wondered if the ships had already been stripped and salvaged, but that was impossible. No one had ever found a salvage this big. We kept going. The ships were docked with each other side to side, so from the first ship we moved on to the next one and so on. In every ship we found a scene similar to the first one. Dirt everywhere on the seats and inner hull, pulled out wires, tools floating here and there. But about midway through, we found a hull that was full of bullet pot marks. That's also where we found our first body. It was nothing more than a desiccated husk, but strangely enough, parts of him were missing, and flesh had been flayed away. On top of that, the walls were covered with great big splotches of brown where globules of blood had splattered everywhere. That was a red flag. We should have stopped there. We should have turned back. We knew something was up. But the idea of us retiring at 30 from this salvage was too good. The commander told us that we at least had to get the black boxes. Someone else could deal with what happened here. We moved on, and still we couldn't find any black boxes anywhere. Then we reached the last ship in the line, and found the door to be welded shut. This was even more unbelievable than anything we'd seen yet. These had clearly been passenger ships, not utility vessels, and the fact that someone had managed to weld the magnesium steel door shut with barely any voltage blew our minds. We tried in vain to shine our lights inside, but the window was covered in black soot. By this time, we were starting to seriously doubt ourselves. Our resolve was being tested. But we did want those black boxes more, so we got some cutting tools and sliced through the crude welds. We forced our way in, and I still remember the sound that the door made when it opened. It was terrifying. The cycling had not reached this part of the hull, so the air rushing into the hull sounded like a diseased lung breathing in, and all the crap that had built up in the door rollers crackled and popped like nothing I'd ever heard. We floated into the hull, and sheer madness greeted us. Skeletal bodies floated and clung like droplets of water along the inner bulkhead. Black soot covered every single inch of plating. Chunks of desiccated meat floated in the zero-G gravity, and every single corpse had human bite marks on it. These were stripped naked. Naked. Every man, woman, and child stripped of their clothes, of their decency, frozen with faces of terror. But what made it worse was the fact that each and every single one of them held a black box in their mummified arms. Whatever had happened there had culminated in that last ship. And as much as we dreaded the idea of ships lost in space, forced to dock together to share meager resources, and finally, running out of them, its crews and passengers losing their minds and turning to cannibalism, we found that we had been looking for. The salvage was ours. The black boxes had been found. Possessed by a manic fearlessness, we floated in, took the black boxes like grave robbers, and floated out. As per procedure, we began closing the doors on our way back, and that's when things started going really bad. As we closed the first door, the one leading to the mass grave, a pair of red eyes appeared and started looking at us from beyond the soot-covered glass. Fear gripped us, and we panicked. Quickly, we started making our way through the hulls of the ships, and they creaked and screamed as we moved through them. Finally, we reached our own airlock, threw in the black boxes, and shut the door, and when we did, we heard a knocking and an inhuman scream, and a pair of eyes started to look at us from our own airlock window. These eyes were inhuman, hungry, starving almost. We vented the air out of the hulks, and still those eyes looked at us. Even worse, they began knocking, scratching. Only when we undocked did the stare stop. We then deployed the pull hooks, set up a salvage beacon, and dragged the mass back to Vesta. I still don't know why we brought it back with us. I suppose it was greed, but maybe something was controlling us already. Salvage crews took over, but no one talked about the horrors they saw when they opened up the ships again. No one commented. The whole affair was silent. Of course, we became rich from this salvage, but we paid the price. Contracted a disease when we touched those ships, and now it's touching everyone on Vesta. It's a strange thing here in space. No matter how horrific things seem, they can only get worse. Old men wake up at night to find their dead spouses looking at them with hungry faces, hollow eyes, and gnashing jaws. Children complain about shadows dancing across their rooms and laughing softly into their ears, preventing them from falling asleep. We wake up in cold sweats and hear scratching in between the walls like rats, but rats don't live out here. We hear dripping like the running of water and loud bangs in deserted hallways that sound like gunshots. And those red eyes. Every single time, those red eyes. Every once in a while, you know, when you're alone and you close a bulkhead, you can see them looking at you. What we found out there in the void was a sickness, and those red eyes are the perfect symptom of it. I can't tell you anymore. I won't tell you anymore. But you know that line about the void looking back at you? About the void looking into you? and taking something, changing you, giving you a hunger that only raw meat can sate. That's what we found in the void.